It's the Ostrom Avenue podcast, and it starts right now.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Ostrom Avenue podcast. Today is Thursday, April 4th, recording this late afternoon. My name is Ethan Frank, and of course, no shortage of news to talk about. And before we get started, as always, the Ostrom Avenue podcast brought to you by Empire Hearing and Audiology. We thank them very much for their continued support of the show. As always, I'm joined by Jordan Leonard. Jordan, how are you?
I'm doing great. The weather here stinks this week. It's raining. It's 40 degrees. It's changing over between rain and freezing rain. But I did get all of my classes on my registration time, so I'm feeling good. I'm having a good day.
Congratulations. Congratulations. I believe it's supposed to perk up next week. If
It
I saw
is.
correctly,
After
it's going to be in
snowing,
the 50s and
potentially.
60s. It might be sunny in the 60s next week. Oh, that excites
As long
me.
as it's good for the solar eclipse. That's all I
Yep,
care
I got my
about.
glasses today.
I
Do you have
did
your
too.
glasses? You want to put them
I got
on? You have them right there.
I got them right
Put them
here.
on. Throw those
Here,
on.
I can take off the hat.
Oh, I got. Oh, did you?
No.
Oh, yeah, I got those too. Oh,
Oh yeah.
look at you.
He's ready to go.
Looking great. That other voice you hear, we got some big news on the show today. A new member of the team is here. It's AJ Myers. AJ, welcome to the Ostrom Avenue podcast. How are you this afternoon?
Awesome. So happy to be joining and, happy to be joining on one of the more busy weeks at Syracuse Athletics. It feels like we get one of those weeks every week, but this week in particular, I think just about everything happened.
It's there's a lot going on. Jordan and I have talked for the past few weeks about the portal mostly and the comings and goings for Syracuse. I mean, what was it last week or 2 weeks ago when we had the Quadir
it
and
was
Taylor departure? I think it was 2 weeks ago.
It was 2 weeks ago because we had recorded.
Yeah, we
Taylor
had
had already
recorded.
been in the portal, and then
Taylor had already
Quadir
been-
entered.
Right, Quadir entered, so we had to deal with that breaking news. Thankfully, our record time today was 4 p.m. and not 3 p.m. Otherwise, we would have had a whole crazy episode. But Judah Mintz will not be returning to Syracuse. I don't think anyone's surprised. The announcement comes via a report from Syracuse.com's Mike Waters, the trustiest of reporters. He's appeared on the show many times. He's been covering the team for over 30 years. I mean, this is a guy that knows everything about the ins and outs of Syracuse basketball, recording with multiple sources with knowledge of Judah Mintz's plans, according to his article on Syracuse.com. And we can get in a whole larger discussion about what exactly this means. I mean, the most interesting thing off the top is that Judah Mintz then replies to Mike Waters' report saying, what did he say? He said,
Get Mike Waters to stop reporting. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was not happy that Waters announced it.
As we know, I unfortunately cannot see it because I've been blocked by Judah Mintz on Twitter. So I can't actually see what the replies are. Oh yes, here it is, because it was sent to me. Please stop letting Mike Waters around the program. And you don't want to rag on the guy. It's just, it's a theme. We've been talking about it, and it's unfortunate to see that kind of route taken by Judah in response to this report. I would say, first of all, it's disappointing.
Yeah, it's very disappointing, and the fact that Mike Waters has been around the program for longer than Judah's been alive. And it's not that it's not true. It is true. Judah's just mad that he announced it before Judah was going to announce it. But to be honest, everyone knew he was going to leave. That is not a secret. If he stayed, I think a lot more people would be shocked if he left. So it's just unfortunate. It's one thing to think it. It's another thing to put it out on Twitter or X or whatever you're calling it. So it's interesting, and really it contributes to kind of the remaking of this team, I think, and not that Judah's a cancer or anything like that. I'm not saying that at all, but it kinds of, rebuilding the culture of what Autry wants to do at this point.
Yeah, I think it's unprofessional for Mintz, especially given that his next step, at least he thinks it is in the NBA. For him to be calling out people at where he doesn't really have the credibility to do so is something I don't think is going to gear him far at all. But then, as you were alluding to, Jordan, if people thought last year's Syracuse team was a fresh start, I think next year's team is even going to be a fresher start with a whole host of new players.
Yeah, and I mean, it feels like every year is almost kind of a fresh start at this point. I mean, as a fan of the team, I would say I'm really excited for a fresh start because the team was winning games at the end of the year, but I mean, the opponents they were beating and the way they were winning didn't really feel all that sustainable.
Hey, they beat
And
NC State twice.
that's true. A team that's in
Not
the
when he
Final
needed
Four.
to.
It's just, you looked at the roster, and it just felt like a bunch of misfit pieces that were, there wasn't much cohesion. It didn't feel like the team chemistry was there down the stretch. And obviously hindsight is 2020. But at this point, it feels like Judah Mintz leaving kind of opens up a lot of avenues for other players to be a lot more successful within a structure of a team and expand their games to play when you don't have a 30+% usage rate player on the floor.
I think when you look at the roster and you think about it, is the roster was built to fit Jim Boeheim's 2-3 zone and what Jim Boeheim was running, because they recruited a lot of these guys as freshmen. And it was great last year when all of them, for the most part, decided to stay, because it provided some continuity for Coach Autry's first year. But it didn't necessarily, all fit and work with what Autry was trying to do, man-to-man defense and any of the stuff that he was doing on offense. So if you look at it, it's finally the first time where Adrian Autry has multiple roster spots to play with to kind of craft the team that he wants to run, whether it's getting up and down the floor, shooting threes, playing man-to-man defense. He finally has open roster spots to craft that, because since nobody left last year, he didn't really have a chance to go add too many portal guys. And by the time that he got the job and by the time that he figured out who was staying and who was going, he didn't really have too many spots to fill through the portal, being like Kyle Cuff and Naheem McLeod and Chance Westry.
Yeah, I think Mintz leaving obviously is going to be a loss for this team, and they're going to have to cope with that. But if the first player that comes to mind that we could see more of or a different version of is JJ Starling. What is his role going to be, and is Autry kind of be shaping a different role for him or a different play style for him? Because I think everyone kind of agree we didn't see the best JJ Starling that we could have seen last season. So how will he flourish more without Judah Mintz?
And I think, we're going to talk about what Syracuse needs to do in the portal moving forward. But while we're on the topic of guards, now that Mintz is gone, you definitely need to add another point guard, or at least a combo guard, if not a point guard, someone who can handle the ball, someone who can create, someone who can initiate offense. I talked about, Jordan and I talked about Chance Westry last week. I would say I'm higher on Chance Westry than most in his potential, because he's 6'6". He facilitates. He's not a score first player. He defends. He has good vision, and he can get to his spots in the paint. So, there's obviously a lot of unknowns, some injury issues, injury history. He's barely played college basketball in the last 2 years, but if he's a valuable, I mean, at this point he's a starter. Because I would say you're starting him over Kyle Cuff at this point. But it just signifies you need another guard in the portal. So you look at where things are right now, and we can bring in the fact that Maliq Brown has also entered the portal. That happened on Monday. And Eddie Lampkin Jr., the center from Colorado, 6'11", 265. The official measurements I saw. I mean, I've seen a couple different measurements. Point being, he's a big guy. He's a big boy. He'll be a 5th-year senior. He commits. So right now, departures. You have 7 departures right now, as I've got it listed. Mintz, Taylor, Copeland, Williams, Brown, Carey, and Munir Hema. And you have 9 rotation players at the moment. Westry, Starling, Bell, Donnie Freeman, Eddie Lampkin, Kyle Cuff, Elijah Moore, Naheem McLeod, and William Patterson is what you have at the moment. You need to probably add at least 2 or 3 more. And, you look at the guard position. Okay, so what are you trying to do here? You're trying to build a team that is, I guess, a mix of youth and experience. What is winning in college basketball right now? Experience. So we just watched a Syracuse team start 5 sophomores for the entire second half of the season. Okay, let's base this mock starting lineup that they would have right now if they didn't even add anyone else. Or let's say they add a veteran guard. You got a veteran point guard or a veteran guard out of the portal with a junior JJ Starling, with a junior Chris Bell, with a star freshman in Donnie Freeman, with a 5th-year senior center in Eddie Lampkin. Okay, now compare that. So the most successful team in college basketball right now is UConn. So let's obviously it's apples to oranges, but let's compare the ages in UConn's starting lineup right now. You have Donovan Clingan, who's a star sophomore, who's a very high recruit. You got star freshman Stephon Castle, 5th-year senior Tristan Newton, 5th-year senior Cam Spencer, and sophomore Alex Caravan. there's like, it's a nice mix of experience and youth. And I think that's kind of what Autry's going for right now in this starting lineup. And obviously they're going to try to add more from the portal, but I'm encouraged by this kind of mix of youth and experience.
Yeah, I think having a balance is good. When you don't have the talent of a UConn team like you just compared it to, I think more experience is better because as much as talent is important, being there and knowing how to play or been in those situations is more important, especially with less talent. So I think the targets in the portal would be more experienced players. Last year, I think the targets were more developmental players like a Kyle Cuff and a Chance Westry who really hadn't played. Naheem McLeod really never got critical minutes at Florida State before he transferred here. So I think the philosophy will change a little bit in terms of getting those more veteran players because of the balance you mentioned. But it's also just important to the positions. At this point, you can target a big man if you need, but I don't really think Syracuse needs another big man. I think they need to fill whatever roster spots they end up doing with a point guard like you mentioned, but also wing players, whether it's a shooter like a Chris Bell, to really complement Chris Bell.
You definitely need another shooter.
We thought Justin Taylor could be good this year, but he didn't end up being a shooter necessarily. So adding a shooter next to Chris Bell, and then maybe even another, wing guy that plays a good defense or something like that to kind of fill in the spot. So I think you're good at center, and you need to add at the positions, whether it's 1, 2, 3, probably not 4, but 1, 2, or 3.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan, you say compliment Chris Bell. I say give competition to Chris Bell because I think we saw last year when he would have 30-point games, but he'd also have games where he just have 5 points and have a really bad shooting percentage. Give him some competition. But really, I think the overarching theme is the secret's out on winning in college basketball. It's having veteran guys. Just look at the teams in the Final Four. There's no all 5 freshmen starting lineups anymore. Not that there really ever was. Yeah, exactly. No Kentucky. So I think Autry knows that. I think that's kind of been the plan going into the portal is let's try and get guys who are either seniors or doing that 5th year. So I think if that's the mold that SU wants to start doing, sure, maybe they're late to the party, but you might as well start now.
Right. So you have Elijah Moore, who's only like 6'4", so he's on the border of being a wing, but he's more guard-ish. I mean,
He's
of the
more
best
of a
shooters.
JJ Starling type guy.
He's one of the best shooters in all of high school basketball. And he's going to, Syracuse hopes he can continue that. I do think you need probably another player with a good amount of like a 6'6" or 6'7" type of shooter to come off the bench because, Bell and Freeman aren't going to play every single minute of every single game in the front court. And I mean, Bell's kind of a swing player as it is. So you need some more wing depth. Obviously, you need another guard, but, you lose depth when Maliq Brown enters the portal. And I'll say, I'll cite Mike Waters again. Him and Brent Axe talked on Monday about, were you surprised when Maliq entered the portal? I mean, yeah, I was a little surprised. I mean, he did tell Donna DeToda like during the course of the end of the season he was coming back. But Mike said something really interesting. He said that he was told last week that one of the 3 presumed guys who were definitely coming back, which he took to be Maliq, Chris, or JJ, was actually 50-50 about coming back. And we sit here today, obviously that guy was Maliq. And he's gone. And I think this is kind of a case, we were talking about it offline, Jordan, that I think, you look at these transfers, the guys who have left. I mean, Taylor's not leaving because he's going to go get a payday somewhere else. He needed a new beginning. And he needed to start anew. I think Quadir, there was just kind of a philosophical difference with him and Autry towards the end of the season. And I think that's why he's leaving. Benny, obviously, pretty obvious why he has entered the portal. Same with Peter Carey. He probably needs to go to a mid-major team.
Siena.
Right. Maybe Siena. Munir Hema is going, I think, to probably a life after basketball.
Yeah.
Yeah. A life after basketball. Judah to the NBA. I mean, Maliq Brown really feels like the only guy here that is leaving because he can get paid elsewhere.
Yeah.
Is my read.
I think it's also just looking at the fact that Syracuse, he probably knew Syracuse was looking for a big man. And once they,
right. How could they not
kind of zeroed in on Eddie Lampkin, Donnie Freeman is going to play. Like he's going to play and he's probably going to start. Like I would be shocked if he didn't start. So if Maliq kind of knew that, he would have to come off the bench as a 4 and he can't really play the threes. As a 4, kind of sharing minutes with Donnie Freeman, that probably also went into the decision of ending up
Right.
entering the transfer
I
portal.
mean, Donnie shoots it well enough that he could play the 3.
He could.
But, like, you're not taking Chris is starting.
Yeah,
Chris Bell is
you
starting.
have to start
Right.
Chris
So,
Bell.
like, if you wanted to go super big and go Starling, Bell, Freeman, Brown, and then like Lampkin,
Complete opposite of what they did.
yeah,
this
that'd be
year.
a huge starting lineup. But then you have like spacing concerns where you have Brown, who I know I've talked up his 3-point shooting a number of times, but I don't know how confident he is to actually shoot it. Like, what is your spacing looking like if you have 2 almost non-shooters out there in your starting lineup, right? If you're Maliq Brown, you're like, okay, he doesn't want to play center. I don't think. I don't know how much
He's
he
too
enjoyed
small
play-
to.
Right.
It's not his
That's
best
nothing
role.
against him. It's nothing
It can't be
against him.
very,
It's
it
just
can't be
his
very
God-given
enjoyable.
height.
Yeah. It can't be very enjoyable. So if he doesn't want to play center and you have Freeman coming in, you're not telling a 5-star recruit, yeah, you're coming off the bench. Like, that's not going to happen. So what do you do if you're Maliq? You're not going back to the bench. Like, if you can go start, he can easily go start at another Power 5 comp, because now it's, I guess, 5 because no Pac-12. So, and you include the Big East in a Power 5. So he's going to go start at another Power 5 program. If you're not going to start at Syracuse, you could be the best team player in the world, and Maliq is probably the number 1 team player on Syracuse from this past year, but you still want to start if you're a starter. You're not getting demoted to the bench.
Yeah, and if you look at Maliq, he's great on defense. He led the ACC in steals this year. He's very versatile. He can guard every position. The one concern would be his offensive game, but if you play him at the 4 with a 5 that can play with his back to the basket and post somebody up, he's actually a pretty solid 4 because he's in that dunker spot for the guards driving, and then also for a center backing down in the post. So honestly, I think him transferring benefits him as well a lot.
Yeah, it definitely benefits him. I think it's a no-brainer because he looked at the situation he was in and is like, well, there's no way I'm really getting in the starting lineup. But just with Judah Mintz leaving, I think there's an argument to be made that Maliq Brown leaving is an even bigger miss for this team because Maliq Brown was Syracuse's best defensive player by a mile last season. And Eddie Lampkin, yes, he's big. Yes, he can score, but his defense isn't, that's not his game. So that role on the defensive end is something SU's going to need to fill. And who's filling that role is, I think, unclear as of right now.
I think that's a really good point because, you look at Lampkin's numbers, averaged 10.5 points and 7 rebounds this year while shooting close to 60% from the field. So, like, he is a true put your back into someone and back someone down in the post. Like, he's a post player, which I think will really benefit a guy like Chris Bell and JJ Starling, that if you throw the ball onto the interior, then they can relocate on the outside. They can do a lot of different things without the ball. And I think that is a place where Chris Bell can really work to improve his game this offseason, is moving and relocating without the basketball. We know he's terrific as a standstill shooter. If he can become a catch on the move shooter and not even have to put the ball on the floor, but just catch on the move and rise and fire. I mean, he shot 43% from 3 this year. Like, he is terrific. I remember one game this season, a colleague of ours was talking to Jerry McNamara in the locker room after the game. He was asking about working with JJ on a shot and then mentioned Chris Bell. He's like, I don't have to work with Chris at all. There's no shooting work that needs to be done with Chris Bell. Just that's how elite of a shooter he is, and with his tremendous size and quick release at 6'7", that makes it a whole lot easier. So when you look at how Lampkin fits, you mentioned AJ, a little bit worrying on the defensive end, not sure how well he can defend in the pick and roll, being, how big he is. I do think, if Naheem McLeod is healthy and he's coming off the bench for 10 to 12 minutes a game as a backup center, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. And then obviously you're still developing William Patterson, and Lampkin's only a 1-year player. He's a grad student. So, you would hope by the time William Patterson's in college, entering his 3rd season, or 3rd year, he's able to play somewhat and be a reserve or maybe even a starting center, depending on how much he improves. I mean, Jesse Edwards' freshman year, we were asking these exact same questions, and look what he ended up being. So you can't rule that out for a guy like William Patterson, who has terrific size at 7'2". It's just about putting the pieces together. So it's clear the needs here. I think they're probably done adding a big man. I'd be surprised if another center was added in the portal. I don't think you're bringing in a center from the portal to be a backup.
No, and if you do, then Naheem McLeod's got to go.
Right. It's not really how it works. No one's coming out of the portal to come off the bench.
Yeah.
It's not really
Unless
how
you're
the
like that
portal
6th
works.
guy where you're guaranteed. decent minutes.
Right. So Syracuse, if your starting lineup right now is Westry, Starling, Bell, Freeman, Lampkin, you're probably looking at, I mean, I don't know if Westry can, I mean, he has the talent. He's the guy who's a top 40 recruit. It's just about, getting his basketball legs under him. Would you like to see Syracuse get a guard to start instead of Westry or be a sixth man, or would you be comfortable with Westry starting?
I just think it depends on who's out there. I mean, I think you have to go with the mindset of let's go get us a starting point guard. And then, if somebody ends up committing to you, they commit to you. If somebody doesn't, and then you have to get a backup, you kind of settle for that backup because of how vast the transfer portal is and how many players are in and out and how many schools are, going after all these different players. You kind of just have to shoot for the stars in a sense, like not go for somebody that's not going to, even think about committing to you, but shoot for that starting point guard. I mean, Chance Westry, as much as he was a top 40 recruit, hasn't shown anything. Like, he hasn't played college basketball. Benny Williams was a top recruit and never played like a top recruit in college basketball. So you can't really rely on that. And you just gotta go and just get the most talented player you can get, whether he ends up being the starting point guard or the sixth man.
If Syracuse wants to be serious about competing and getting to March Madness, I think they have to go out and get an experienced guard because, like we mentioned, that's the formula to winning. And if you think you have a talented enough team and that's your one missing spot and you're relying on someone who doesn't have much experience, I think that's going to be a flaw. So I think they should absolutely try. It's just whether or not they can get it.
They're going to add a guard. I think it's just about the caliber of guard they do end up adding. So, and that remains to be seen. And, another thing that Mike was talking about, he said more likely that this team adds players before it fills Jerry McNamara's void on the bench as an assistant coach. And, with the portal only being open for less than a month remaining now, you're going to try to add as many players as possible to fill all this void of everyone that has left. And I think, people were surprised. People are still upset about Maliq leaving. And obviously it's unfortunate, but like the overwhelming feeling I got, which was kind of surprising, is I just have this innate sense of trust in Adrian Autry. Like, I think after covering him this entire year and listening to him speak, like, I think he's got the goods. Like, I do think he can build a winner. And I think, this is kind of, this, like, last season, it just felt like, okay, we're going to see how things go with all these players that were here last season. We're going to bring everyone back. We're going to make some small additions. But like, you think about who recruited who. Judah was very late in the process. I don't think he committed until like the end of March, his senior year. Justin Taylor was an Autry recruit, but Maliq was a Jerry McNamara recruit. I believe, I'm not sure about Bell coming from California. But like, and JJ Starling was a guy that Adrian Autry recruited. Chance Westry was a guy
Pretty sure
that
Quadir might have been Jerry.
I think Quadir was Jerry as well. Like, it's a lot of these players were not Adrian Autry was not the primary recruiter on him. I want to say Alan Griffin might have been the Chris Bell recruiter.
Oh, he might have.
I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think that sounds right. It's like, I think this is clear that this is Adrian Autry putting his stamp and saying, I don't care what it is. We need to change. We need to adapt. We need to evolve. And for that, I have a lot of respect for that. And I trust him to do what he thinks is right, because I do think he is going to be a good coach. And this is a sign of it. Like, it's not to say that these players were bad apples, but there was clearly problems. And there was clearly a disconnect between what was being done on the floor versus what was being said from the coaches to the players because of how they wanted to play versus how the coaches wanted them to play.
Yeah, I think you just got to look at it at this point. Now, every recruit coming in is going to have the mindset of, I'm coming to play for Adrian Autry and his system and not Jim Boeheim. As much as, they stayed to play with Autry initially when they committed, they were committing to a 2-3 zone. They're committing to Jim Boeheim and his bevy of assistant coaches. And there's nothing bad about that. It's just kind of, he's as Autry said in his introductory press conference, it's continuing the orange standard, but with his own spin on it. So he's finally getting his chance to put his own spin on it. I think the trust that you're alluding to comes from the fact that he won 20 games with this group. Because if you look at it, like with the injuries and the kind of the holes that you can point out to, I mean, you look at the big man, just the ability for a big man to play in the post to one, open up Chris Bell. But then if they double Chris Bell, that opens up the post for the big man that Syracuse didn't have to score last year. So there's just like the fact that he won 20 games with that group, I think buys him that, respect and confidence that he can, with open spots, go out and get players to come here that will make this team good in making the NCAA tournament in the short future.
Yeah, I think there was no expectation, at least for me, for Autry last season, given the group that he had and then all the obstacles that he faced. And I think now we can finally get to see what brand of basketball he wants to play and what style of basketball he wants to play, because it takes time in college basketball. You got to get not rid of those players, but get those players out that were recruited by the past coach or coaches for you to finally play your brand of basketball. And now we're seeing that. And next year, it may be a different style of play than we saw this year because it's finally the group of guys that Autry wants.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Donnie Freeman. I must say, guys, I'm in. Like, I'm diving in the deep end. I'm so in.
Was it the buzzer beater?
I was watching the McDonald's All-American game intently. I mean, everything I was reading, everyone's saying, oh, who helped himself the most this week? Donnie Freeman. Like, all these scouts and evaluators are talking about how much this guy has improved over the course of the last year or so to be where he's at now and be a true 6'9". And people were saying I think people were saying he was listed as 6'8", but like, it's like there's no way. Like, he is 6'9" or maybe even 6'10". He's shooting the ball at a tremendously high rate. I mean, they're talking about how he could be useful in the pick and pop and all these different actions. You think about if Lampkin has the ball in the post and Donnie's in the dunker spot, he can move all around the paint and then step out and hit it from three as well. Having a guy who shoots and moves like him, I mean, the way he plays now, it reminds me of like a Jeremy Grant, but like a professional, like a Jeremy Grant, like 6 years into his NBA career, not Jeremy Grant when he was at Syracuse. Like, that's how advanced it feels like Donnie Freeman is. And I mean, I know everyone got super hyped up for Benny. Oh, Benny was not a 5-star. Okay, let's stop talking about Benny as a 5-star. He was in the 30s.
Was Donnie
Freeman,
officially a 5-star?
He's a 5-star on the 24/7 Sports composite.
Okay.
So, like, I'm pulling it up right now.
To be honest, like having and I'll let you continue in a second.
Yeah.
Having watched the All-American game, like, his shooting form is 20 times better than Benny's shooting form ever was. Like, no offense to Benny, but
he was 23rd overall, 4-star on 24/7, but on the composite, which compiles all the industry rankings, he's 26th and a 5-star. So, like, if you take the average, he's a 5-star. And like, they're very different players. I mean, Benny was kind of the slasher. Like, I mean, we talked about earlier this year, like, he never really had a defined skill. Like, Donnie has a lot of skills where he shoots the ball, he rebounds, he defends, he protects the rim. He does all of these things. And I know, all Syracuse fans got super hyped up for Benny being, one of the more recent highly rated prospects to come. And then it just didn't work out. And like, we're starting to do it again with Donnie, but I feel like there's a clear distinction and difference between these two players.
No, I agree. I think there's a clear distinction in the shooting ability. I think you can be, as highly rated as you can in high school. And obviously some of that's not all of it, but some of it's dependent on who you play and what leagues you play in, like if you're playing AAU and all that stuff. But if you can shoot the ball, especially in high school, I think that aids you a little bit more in college because you can rely on that. Like, I mean, Chris Bell is obviously not comparative to Donnie, but he could shoot, and he didn't shoot his best ever in his freshman year. But because he could shoot, he was actually, relied on to score 6 to 9 points a game. Now, when you take that and give more talent, and that's Donnie Freeman, then those expectations are going to be a little bit higher. So I think the fact that he can shoot is going to bring a lot to the game. Honestly, I didn't watch too much of the All-American game itself, specifically watching Donnie Freeman because my 2 Rutgers commits, I'm a big Rutgers fan. My 2 Rutgers commits were in the starting lineups, so I watched the starters play a lot more than the off the bench guys and Donnie Freeman. But I'm very excited. I think anytime you get a guy that has that height, length, and athleticism that can shoot coming to college as a freshman, it's only exciting.
When you have the size and you can shoot, I think that's a key in any brand of basketball now, to have that ability to work not only in the paint, which I'm sure he can do, but then to also shoot, what you saw in the All-American game as well. I think it's a new asset to a Syracuse team that they don't have but I think everyone should, maybe they learn from Benny Williams, you don't go all in on him until you actually see him play and give him the time, because as we discussed, it looks as though he'll be thrown right into the starting lineup. So Ethan, as excited as you are, I don't want to get too excited, just because I know it will probably be some growing pains.
He'll at least
Of
have some
course.
experience around him.
Yes. Right.
Yes.
Of course there will be. I think, we'll see how this roster kind of, fills out and comes together. I think there are a lot more pieces to the puzzle that are going to be added, at least 2, if not 3. And the thing about the portal is, like, we truly cannot predict like what is going to happen next. Until we heard Eddie Lampkin was visiting, there was no idea that Eddie Lampkin's on Syracuse radar. Like, you can truly only guess. Like, there's the reports that go out, this person has heard from these 25 schools since entering the portal, and that's
Yeah.
literally all you can base it on, unless you're talking to their high school coach or their parents. Like, that's literally all that it is. So we won't even play the guessing game. We will just react to the news. And continuing forward, last basketball thing on our robust agenda today here on the show is Jerry McNamara officially being introduced as the 19th head coach at Siena. Personally, I'm always been a Jerry McNamara fan. He's always been super gracious with his time. He's clearly a good player developer, a good recruiter, a winner, someone who is ready to become a head coach. And I said it the other day, I'm officially declaring myself a Siena Saints fan as my mid-major team. Just 'cause I love Jerry McNamara. I love everything about him as a player, as a coach. I love Jerry McNamara, and I will be following the Saints moving forward.
I loved that text from me, by the way. I mean, I saw it, and then I clicked into it, and I was like, oh, I should have seen this coming, given your fandom. But I mean, it's a great move for Jerry. I mean, also, side note, the suit with the, the ode to Jim Boeheim with the inside, that was cool. That was very cool. And, he's already got Adam Weitzman potentially on board for some NIL
I did
deals
see that.
over at
I did
Siena.
see that.
So he's looking up. He's already hired a local guy, the Liverpool high school head coach, as an assistant. He's got one commit in
He
the
officially
portal.
hired Ryan Blackwell.
I think I saw reports from Brent and Donna about it, so I believe that's official or it's going to happen. And then you look at, he's already got a commit from, I believe, Hofstra it is. So he's already off and rolling. It should be fun to watch.
No, yeah, I'm excited for him. It's the next, this next stepping for him. Everyone wants to be the head coach, be the top dog, and now he is. And for me, I learned a lot about him in that documentary on the 03 team. Not no much his playing style, but more of him on a personal level, and really how much he cares about coaching. And he said it in his introductory press conference, how much he just loves to coach in general, and now he gets to do it as a head coach. So super happy for him, and he'll be a miss for Syracuse, but I think it's honestly overdue. I think he could have been a head coach 5 years ago.
He definitely could have. And, it's the logical next step, because I'm sure his dream one day is to be the Syracuse head coach. And he wasn't going to be the Syracuse head coach if he just stayed as an assistant for Adrian Autry, unless he wanted to wait it out until Adrian Autry retires in 20 years from now. Right. Adrian Autry's only in his early 50s. So he's going to be around for a little while. So we'll see how Siena does this year. That's a program in the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference that could potentially make some noise. I think it'll be a little bit of a rebuild. They did go 4-28 last year, so it might take some time to build them up, but a lot of energy and excitement around the program. Let's switch over to lacrosse to wrap things up here on the show. A tough loss for Gary Gates' crew over the weekend at Notre Dame, 14-12. The Irish now winners of 7 in a row against the Orange, dating back to 2019. I believe this is the closest game the two teams have played in quite some time. And then an absolute bottle job in Ithaca at Cornell on Tuesday night. In what looked to be an ugly game. Pat March is ejected at the end of the first quarter, and Cornell comes from 6 goals down in the final 15 minutes to take the lead before the game goes to overtime, and CJ Kirst wins it in double OT. I'll leave it over to you, Jordan, as the preeminent lax expert. What happened?
That was such a frustrating game to watch. One note on the Notre Dame game, it might have been close, but it didn't feel close until the end, because they were down by at least 6 for most of the game until they went on a run in the fourth quarter. But in terms of the Cornell game, they were up 7-0, and then Pat March gets ejected, 3 minutes of non-releasable penalties. Cornell only scores 2 goals, which is probably great for Syracuse in that sense. And they just lost it. I honestly don't know, because they won the face-off battle by a lot. It's just Cornell like out-toughed and out-physicaled them, and really just like Syracuse lost their focus, I think, at some point. The offense stopped executing as well, which, you can attribute to potentially Gary Gait having to coach the offense directly by himself for the first time in a while. And I know I've talked to him. He's talked about, he's always calm, cool, and collected on those sidelines. And it's a Pat March really coaching on the offense. And it talked about his trust. Well, Pat March was not there. So you have to step up and coach that offense. They had
Like
7
Rick said,
goals
he's
before.
the CEO. He's the CEO.
So they had 7 goals before Pat March got ejected at the end of the first quarter. In the next 3 quarters, they had 10 combined. So, I mean, the offense went down a little bit. Cornell's not a great defense. It was honestly, I think, one of those games where Syracuse was up by so much, then the ejection kind of threw them off and just gave Cornell fuel to the fire. And I think Cornell was more desperate. I mean, you look at what their record is, what league they play in the Ivy League. They need to win as many games as they can to get in. And I'm not saying Syracuse doesn't, but Syracuse is, probably one win, if you include that game, was one win away from firmly solidifying themselves in the NCAA tournament. And I think Cornell was just more desperate, and that showed in the second half for sure.
It kind of looked like a Syracuse of old, where in the Maryland game or the Army game, when it got to overtime, they just folded. And for this game, it didn't take till overtime. It took to the second quarter when there was a little bit of adversity and the team completely crumbled. And then coming into the third quarter, you thought maybe they'd be regrouped. They'd play like they played in the first quarter. They'd get over the whole ejection thing. They didn't. Cornell was the better team in the third quarter and in the fourth until the last, 7 seconds when SU tied the game. And then they just couldn't hang around in overtime. And then into double overtime, of course, they lose. So I think it's a disappointing loss. And it's a look in the mirror and you say, are you that national championship team? Or are you just still that third, fourth best team in the ACC? I don't know, because it's just every game with this Syracuse lacrosse team is just kind of up in the air of what kind of team you're going to get. Are you going to get the team that commandingly beat Duke, or are you going to get the team that blows a 7-goal lead to Cornell?
I honestly think it helps them long term, though. Like, if you look at it,
but they've had so many losses like this.
This is yes, but it all adds up at the end of the day in terms of fuel to the fire. I think they actually played well in overtime. I didn't think they played horribly in overtime. They won the faceoffs. They had they had more quality offensive possessions than they usually have had in overtime, and they avoided a man down goal in overtime somehow, or a Cornell man up. But it's not what you want. But I think at the end of the day, it helps bring some anger to the group that sometimes I think, if you beat a Duke by a lot, can get a little bit lackadaisical in the fact where, you're in the ACC, and, I think it refocuses them a little bit more.
Maybe, but I think I'll look at it on the flip side is it a problem? Can they get big leads and they can't hang on?
No, that's a good point.
Or is it, a factor if it's a close game, they can't close it out?
Honestly,
they haven't had any close
too.
games where they've closed out.
The conditions, if you look at any time they play in conditions that are not ideal, they don't play nearly as well if they play in the dome or in warmer weather.
Well, that's not good either.
I got 3 points. First of all, I love the point you made about being desperate, Jordan, because one of my favorite quotes that I've heard is you can't fake desperation. And if you're the more desperate team, if you're down, then you're going to inherently be more desperate than the other team. Because that's just like how human beings work. When you're fighting back, there's more of a push than in going forward. Second, so I guess Gary's still looking for that, true road game ranked win here a little bit. I mean, I have to pull up schedules.
I guess Hopkins was a neutral site.
Right. Hopkins was a neutral
site. I mean, you
look
at the Hopkins game too. They won, but
they hung on. Yeah,
they hung 5. On. They were up by 5 and they start holding on to the ball and they almost lost.
They almost blew that. Yeah.
And then the third is this team has played a lot of games. They're going to end up playing 3 more games than Notre Dame. Right. Is the turnaround from Notre Dame on Saturday to at Cornell on Tuesday maybe a factor in why?
Absolutely.
Yes, but Cornell then played back-to-back overtime games. So
yeah, Cornell had also played on Saturday. So it's hard to take that into consideration. But I do think the back-to-back games doesn't help. But also, you got to look at it like I was looking at the metrics. SU has played the hardest schedule in the country, number one.
So I guess they did win on the road at Princeton last year. That was a true road ranked victory
sure.
against an okay Princeton team.
I think anyone outside the top 15 is just anyone outside of like the top 12 in lacrosse is like okay compared to where Syracuse's standards should be.
So that's really the only ranked true road win during Gary Gates' time
They
as the
played
head
Duke
coach.
well last year, considering they didn't have a face-off guy that can win one. The Duke game at the end of the year.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it never really felt like they were going to win that game, but they
They
were
couldn't win a
competitive.
face-off because
Right, they were competitive. So 2 regular season games left at Carolina, home Virginia, then the ACC tournament. You're locked into the ACC tournament if you win at one of them,
yeah,
right? If not already,
you may be already, but it would really depend.
Ideally, you
on
win one.
right?
Yeah, if you win one, you're locked. If you don't win one, you still could. But if you beat North Carolina, you're locked in the ACC.
So what? They're 9-4.
They're 9-4.
9-4. So we'll see how things play out. Do you guys have any off weekend this weekend, which I'm sure is a nice reprieve, an interesting way that Gary made the schedule. To get this off weekend in April is kind of nice. And then you got 2 regular season games remaining. Paul Gates' number going up in the rafters against Virginia. That should be a really, really exciting game. Anything else anybody wants to add on before we wrap things up?
Honestly, if you look at that North Carolina game, I think that's a must win if you're Syracuse. Like North Carolina's not as good as they usually are. They're not even in the top 20 right now. So I think that's a must win. That would lock you into the ACC tournament. It probably would lock you into the NCAA tournament because if you think about it, Virginia, top 2, and then either Duke, Notre Dame, or Virginia, all top 3 would be the first round ACC tournament game. So if you lose those games, nobody's really going to cry wolf there. So I think you got to win North Carolina. It locks you into that ACC tournament. It probably takes the pressure off in terms of the NCAAs, which Gary should feel pressure to get to this year. And then, no holds bar against Virginia. So I think that UNC game, as much as the top 5 win against Johns Hopkins and then Duke were important, that might end up being the most important game of the year in terms of where it lies on the schedule.
Yeah, I think it's so important because Virginia, I think many could make the argument, is better than Syracuse. They are just a better team. So if you do fall to North Carolina, then that final regular season game almost becomes a championship game if it matters for the ACC tournament and the NCAA tournament as well. So that UNC game could be key, and it's probably good for Syracuse that they get this week off because after those 2 defeats, I think they need it.
Absolutely.
Probably do. No, rest is important. Got to recover. Got to let Pat March cool off a little bit after his.
Well, he might not be able to coach against North Carolina. When you're ejected from the game, it may or may not result in a 1-game suspension.
Well, I'll be excited to hear about it. I'm excited for you that you get to go to Chapel Hill, Jordan, one of my favorite places.
It should be interesting.
Definitely my favorite travel destination in the ACC. They're all my.
I got to get my allergy meds out so I don't die of allergies when I go down there.
Before we sign off, AJ, why don't you tell the audience a little bit more about you as a new member of the crew here?
Yeah, awesome.
Where are you from?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any prior college rooting interests like Jordan and his Rutgers Scarlet Knights here? I guess I'll say I hope not, because we'll be a Syracuse centric podcast. But tell the people a little bit more.
Yeah, no, super excited to be joining, and thank you to you guys as well. So I'm from Doylestown, Pennsylvania. That's like an hour outside of Philadelphia, and of course, Philadelphia, plenty of colleges, but never really was affiliated to any of them. My parents didn't go to any school in Philadelphia. When Villanova was doing really well and winning national championships, of course I followed them, but never really got affiliated to any college Philadelphia school. So I can confirm that Syracuse is definitely my first interest of college athletics. But professional wise, the Philadelphia teams are of course there, but we're going to keep it college centric here. But super excited to be joining, and I cannot wait to talk about this Syracuse lacrosse team for the rest of the season. And of course, a super exciting football season ahead of us. And of course, basketball, as we mentioned.
Yep. We'll be talking, or these guys will be talking with Emily Laker coming up in a few weeks, we hope. about what's going on with spring practice and everything Fran Brown is doing as this team gets closer and closer to summer workouts and then to the season come August and September. All right, that will do it for this edition of the Ostrom Avenue podcast. Thank you once again to Empire Hearing and Audiology for their continued support of the show. We wouldn't be able to do this without them. Make sure you're following us on Twitter at Ostrom Avenue Pod. If you watch this on the Ostrom Avenue Podcast YouTube page, thank you. And if you haven't checked out the Ostrom Avenue Podcast YouTube page, you should. It's very easy to find. All of our interviews live there, some full episodes there as well. A whole lot more to come. Next week, I can say scheduling wise, very sadly, next week will be my final episode on the Ostrom Avenue Podcast, a bittersweet ending. But wouldn't want to be next to a couple of other guys who I'm excited to talk more ball with. And maybe there's more. I'm sure, you know what? Last week I said maybe there'll be more news. No, this week there will be, not maybe, there will be more news for us to talk about next week. Of course, we'll have some takes to send you off with. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.